book discussion, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell by Robert Dugoni.
We talk about books here at this podcast series for various reasons. One is the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And we like to think that reading books is more than just a pastime of hedge fund managers. It's really part of the business because reading books is yoga for the mind. Maybe I could use a better analogy here, but it really is yoga for the mind. It makes you flexible. It opens up your thinking processes. It connects your synapses in different ways. And that leads to more interesting thoughts. And you're in the knowledge business as a hedge fund manager. Whoever's listening to this podcast, I hope you have some sort of interest in understanding the process of running a hedge fund. And the process of running a hedge fund really implies a lot of knowledge creation, knowledge analysis, and reading books is I like to compare it to a UFC fighter that does conditioning, right? It's not going to help you win a fight, but you need to do conditioning in order to keep yourself fit and flexible, and that's kind of the way we see it. So that's why we do this, and this is a very nice book. It's I would recommend it to read. The purpose is, however, not to do book recommendations here. This is not a book club. This is, the purpose is to give sense what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we want to use this as a tangent for thoughts, for ideas, if possible, connected to the business. It's not necessary. This book certainly doesn't give a lot of connection, although there's one connection I'm going to mention. So fundamentally, I want to mention 3 points here. I think one, I want to talk about the most important idea of the book is the importance of belief and faith, and the connection between that and love and success. I think those things are all intertwined. Another thing I want to talk about here is the concept of tolerance and inclusion, and I don't want to load it with the political connections that it has these days. I don't think it's relevant. I think the author actually in the acknowledgement mentions that he had an incident in his own family that made him write this book, and you can feel that, you can see that deep feeling that the author is able to convey, that I think you can only convey either if you're a fantastic author, or if you just have if you have some skin in the game, and this author certainly has some skin in the game. And lastly, I always like to also give some technical critique, some narrative critique, some just novelistic feedback. I'm a writer myself, so I like to think about the sort of the techniques and things like that. And I think in this particular case, I would say again, there's a really positive thing, which is it comes from the heart, which is incredibly important when you write anything. I think the downside is a little bit, this author is a suspense and mystery writer, and you can kind of feel that it's a little bit constructed. I would say the plot is not. It just doesn't flow very well. It's a bit too much. It has the feel of an airport pocketbook type novel. Unfortunately, because it's not that kind of novel. Don't get me wrong, but the plot construction is a little bit like that, and I think that comes from the background of the author, who is a suspense and mystery writer. So he does that for a living. He writes. My point here is he creates suspense when maybe you just don't need it. He creates even mystery sometimes when you don't need it. It's a bit too much constructed into the story. The book is very similar actually to Damon Copperhead. It's a coming of age story about a boy that is handicapped in many different ways. Doesn't matter what the details are, but it's a story of struggle, of love, of acceptance, and refusal, and all that stuff. And I think Damon Copperhead is a much better execution. The author there has done a really good literary job in just depicting the story of a boy in a very neutral way. So you can you obviously root for the guy in the book. I think as a normal human, you want to root for this person the same way you root for Sam Hill. You do root for him, but there's again the story is a bit too constructed. I think in Damon Copperhead it just flows more organically, more naturally. I think the author there has a lot more skin in the game also as far as the environment is concerned. She talks about West Virginia and the coal towns there and the sort of depressed situation and the drug addiction and things like that, which are a lot more authentic. Here, the plot is actually in the Bay Area, and I don't know if the author is from the Bay Area, but and it's fine. I mean, he does a good job in writing about little details that you will pick up if you live in the Bay Area. The 49ers, Monday Night Football obsession in San Francisco, things like that. He gets that, but I still feel like this author could be living in Dublin, as far as I'm concerned. So it's more of a research kind of way, like Tom Wolfe writing about Miami, right? It's very well researched, but he is not a Miami guy. So that's kind of it. This is not even on podcast. It's May 30th, 2024. This is Crim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 20 basis points. The market's down 30 basis points. For the year, we are down 9.5%. The market is up 9.7%. We're underperforming by 19.2%. The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hill, I think, again, a very nice book. It's a book it's a coming-of-age story of a boy, grows up in the Bay Area, has some medical condition that makes him being sort of singled out. There's stories of bullying and things like that. There's definitely a big plot of acceptance. Whether it's within in this case, the Catholic environment, goes to Catholic school, and the dichotomy of Christian acceptance and also refusal at the same time, which has been probably characterized in the history of Christianity over the last 2,000 years. Right? On the one hand, it's definitely a religion of love and inclusion, but then it has been also politically, at least, a religion of exclusion and even worse. So that comes across here. The author does a good job in sort of traversing some of the dilemmas. Let's say there's a character in the book, a very religious sort of sister teaching at a Catholic school that at the same time is also a very not accepting type of person, and you start feeling the conflict here. Well, you can't be a person of faith and devout to the Catholic faith and at the same time be so exclusive. But then the author gives you a little bit of a shorthand here. There's some weakness, some alcoholism involved, and then you kind of, okay, you understand, all right, fine, this person comes from an angle of weakness, from an angle of desperation, and the whole story kind of ends up making sense in that particular context. Now let me talk about, like I said, the three main things. I think the fundamental sort of, the way I like to think about a novel is always, how does it make me feel, right? How does it make me feel? And this novel makes me feel attracted to the concept of faith and the concept of belief. It's a line that goes through the story, and I think if there is a connection between this book and the business, maybe that will be it. So let me indulge here in a tangent, and the tangent is that I think no matter what you do in life, you have to have belief. You have to believe in something, right? It doesn't have to be religion, of course, but there has to be something, and that belief cannot be constructed. Very often, particularly in contemporary politics and even in school or sports or wherever people navigate to, there's this, I would call it, artificial construct of belief. You have to believe in winning, or you have to believe in love, or you have to believe in whatever, inclusion or something, and it's not organic, and people are forced into it, almost like in a totalitarian regime, like communism or something, where you have to just believe in the doctrine, or otherwise you'll be chastised. And this novel is not about that. This novel is about the genuine belief, even though there is this generational gap between the parents, classical, canonical situation. The parents are devout Catholics. The son doesn't really believe in the story and gets disappointed throughout his life until finally he accepts the faith, and he doesn't do it in a sort of, okay, fine, I'm just gonna go to church now every day type of way. It's more, he accepts it through the door of love. So once he understands what love really means to him, he also accepts the faith of his parents, for example, or he accepts the faith of his to-be wife and kid, and things like that. So the path is through love, which really is, if you go way back, that's how it started with Christianity, and that's probably how it starts in everywhere. Whether it's Buddhism, whether it's the love for the game in sports, or the love for the art in the arts. Before you believe in something, you have to first feel some sort of love. And I think feeling is very important. Feeling is, from a neuroscience perspective, is really just simply all the stuff that we process that we can't rationalize, that our frontal cortex doesn't have an answer to, but it's still there, and it's information, it's knowledge, it's something that guides us. And feeling is important, and love is probably the ultimate feeling, and that's what this novel depicts. There's another sort of tangent to this, which is inclusion, and again, inclusion not in the sort of contemporary political way, which is very constructed and political, like I said, but inclusion more in a organic way. In other words, well, like, what's the rationale behind excluding somebody or something from accepting or living with, or whatnot? Like, what is there? What's the evolutionary purpose of inclusion or exclusion? Now, if you push it to the limit, I would think you find that there's certainly an evolutionary case to be made for exclusion. Like, you want to protect your tribe, scarcity of resources. I'm in the process of writing an essay actually about this, about peak ostension. In a sense, this is a tangent again, that I believe that one of the positives of an economy of abundance should be that we humans, we get a little bit, let's say, further away from this concept of exclusion, concept of status and vanity and scarcity, which makes evolutionary sense in a world of scarcity, but certainly doesn't make sense anymore in a world of abundance. And that we could change our genetic predisposal to exclusion, and maybe that's what wealth does, and maybe that's why we are having a conversation today, or I mean, we've had this conversation for the last at least 50 years of the necessity of inclusion of race, of gender, of religion, things like that. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, on the flip side of that, and actually the author does a pretty good job in also showing the flip side of inclusion. For example, you have this fundamental, well, it's not an oxymoron, but it's a paradox, right? Why do I want to join? Let's say if in this particular case, there's the author writes in the I person, so he, the narrator, has a condition that makes a lot of people be scared of him. And the Catholic school, the local Catholic school, doesn't want to admit him because they just are concerned about bullying and kids being negative towards the boy. But then the mother is stubborn, she wants, and pushes through, and then the boy goes to the school, and there's a lot of problems that happen. So there's this paradox with, why do I want to be part of a club that doesn't want me? So there's this fundamental paradox, of course. But I think the way traditionally this type of behavior has been explained is always, well, if nobody opens their mouth, we will always live under fear, under exclusion, and things like that. And I think there's some of that is true, but then we also have to bear the cost. I think the cost, the author actually mentions, in the acknowledgement, that he wrote the story actually with an inspiration with his own family. He has a brother who has Down syndrome, and he explains how his mother was fighting for, let's say, for people with Down syndrome to be educated in the public school system, etc., etc. Now, of course, these are all good things. Nobody wants to question whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But if you look at the actual execution of this type of inclusion today, there's certainly two caveats. One is, what is the cost of it, right? For example, I mean, the canonical example I always use is, we want to have handicapped parking spots for people that are handicapped at Whole Foods. Of course, we want to have that. But if we have 10 of them, and then there's no more parking spots for let's say, just for example, there's a young lady that wants to go shopping late at night and she can't park close to the door, so she has to park somewhere far away while there are 10 handicap parking spots free. She parks far away, it's dark, she's scared, maybe, there's a risk of being attacked. Like, there's this, what's the cost? What's the social cost of this?
And what's the individual cost of this? I always ask myself, for example, you want to cheat on the SAT, you want to pretend you're mentally ill, get more time on the SAT, you get a higher score of the SAT, and then what? Then you get admitted to MIT, and then what? You can't compete. Like, what's the actual cost for the individual that is trying to join a club that by a priori doesn't either accept him, or maybe the barriers are too high? Like, there's a fundamental oxymoron here that I ask myself very often. Like, I've had this experience in sports. Let's say I've seen people that are desperate to join an elite football team, and then they can't compete at the highest level, and then they get frustrated. So we should ask ourselves a little bit more deeper: what is the cost of a forced inclusion or an inorganic inclusion versus organic inclusion? An organic inclusion is one where both sides, sort of a John Rawls type or Kantian, like, I can include you without making anybody else worse off kind of way. How about we start with that, and then we impose rules and regulations around that? So that would be my take on this. And I think the book doesn't really address that question. However, the book shows the cost of inclusion at all costs.
So there's this whole industry now of
Constructing situations, whether it's you're mentally ill or whether it's you have some sort of racial background,
trying to fit into some sort of category, so you get a slack, or you get more time on the SAT, or you don't have to have straight A's and still get accepted, all of that stuff. And I think that's just counterproductive to anybody, in particular to the people that we're supposed to be protecting in the first place. So those are things that the author is not addressing. And I think if you want to write a novel, a real fundamental novel, and I think Cormac McCarthy has done a great job in The Passenger, his latest novel, where he opens up these topics and he brings up all of these cases, and then also explains, or Cormac famously doesn't have an opinion, he only has characters, so you can make your own judgment. Okay, so the second point I want to talk about is the way this novel makes me feel in terms of what am I really getting out of this? And I think I really, really strongly associate with the author's relationship towards faith and belief. Again, faith and belief as general aspects of a human, not faith in the church or any of that. Doesn't matter. You can have faith even in your own sports team, but let's leave that aside. Let's say you have faith in some sort of religion. Let's just leave it at that. And I think it's very, very important to have that. The same way it's important to have faith in the company you work for, in the mission you work for. You just have to have that. You have to have faith in the purpose of the studies that you're doing at university, or faith in the and that's part of the problem with our schooling system, particularly K-12. In my opinion, there's no real purpose, so people don't really have faith in the learning process, while the learning itself is probably the most important part of K-12. It's not being conveyed very well. So I think we could do a much better job, and I think in this case, Dugoni does a really good job in pushing that through. Like, it's important to have belief, it's important to have faith, and working on how to harness that, I think, is a very valuable exercise. And if the school system can't do it, at least as parents, we can do it to our kids. I think, lastly, the last thing I want to mention, last but not least, of course, is some of the literary techniques and methods and tools that the author's using. So one thing positive, this comes from the heart. And he says that in the acknowledgement, you can feel it. This story comes from the heart, and it's so important. It's always, look, if you're a writer, you better tell a good story. And the best story is always your story. Now, you can you can, put some lipstick on it, put it into the context of a novel, autobiography. I don't believe in those marketing gimmicks. It doesn't matter what the story is, whether it's an autobiography, a biography, whether it's a novel, a play. Just write a good story, and the good story has to come from the heart. Now, some people, some amazing writers can just do it on the, like the same way actors can be in character and do amazing acting. Great for them. Most people can't do that. Most people just have one heart, one soul, but getting that across is hard enough. And this author does a very good job. I think on the negative side, what I don't like is this constructed narratives. And again, he comes from the mystery novel industry, and that's of course what they do. They create these narratives. Let's say you want to also write for Hollywood. I mean, you have to, something has to happen, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to watch the movie, kind of thing. And in this case, unfortunately, that's also part of the book, and it's not necessary. I think there's enough, again, there's enough heart and soul, and there's enough topics here that on their own already make a good story. You don't need to add suspense and death and love and betrayal and things like that. But again, I give the author some slack because that's where it comes from. To summarize again,
The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell.
recommended reading. I think it covers some of the most important aspects of it's a generic um, topic of faith and love and belief and persistence and a lot of good things, a lot of biblical things, if you will. Yeah, and I think that's why these types of things resonate with us, because they are fundamental, they are deep, if you will. They're, there's sort of these low dimension vectors that drive us, and we all should at least have an opinion about it. Look, you can be somebody that says, I don't need faith, but then explain to me why and what's the alternative. Okay, how are you going to answer Nietzsche's question, God is dead, what comes afterwards, right? That's the fundamental question. If you don't want to believe in God, okay, but you better believe in something. It's really difficult not to. I think that's just how we humans are designed from the get. I think that's our evolutionary advantage. And if we give that up, then what's the point? And I think we have an obligation, given the kind of intelligence that we have been able to develop, which is a huge resource and a source of wealth. We have to use it properly. We have to use it in a way that at least gives our offsprings and maybe their offsprings and every other offspring maybe going forward, if we can, a better life. I think that's a good purpose. And how do you actually channel that, and whether you call this religion or whatever you call that doesn't really matter, but you have to believe in something and have faith, and I think that's what this book kind of gets across. So in that sense, I'm really happy about the book. I think it makes me feel interested. It gives me a feeling also of sometimes a bit of like, well, when the topic of inclusion, for example, which is constantly coming up, that there are better ways to do it and worse ways to do it. So it makes me feel or think about these things. So it's just great. And on the literary tool and technique front, I think the author does a great job because it comes from the heart. And maybe the narrative is a little bit too constructed, but overall, again, the book really has a big. It carries a lot of emotions with it, and I think that's beautiful about the book, and that's great, and that's worth reading. Thank you.